Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Second Language Writing Intersections Tech Tips event. We're here with 5 outstanding graduate students from UTSA who are willing to share some tech tips, how they use technology in the teaching of second language writing. Since it's a big group, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves before they get started. And we'll start off with Elise.
All right. So just in case anybody wants a copy of it, wants to click through, because there are some things hyperlinked in the presentation, feel free to jump in there and look at the presentation I just dropped in the chat. And I will also share my screen and introduce myself as I get set up here. So to introduce myself, my name is Elise Britton, and I'm starting my 3rd year as a PhD student at UTSA. And if you want to get in touch with me, you have the presentation if you want to ask any questions or anything about that. So to get us started with our tech tips, I want to talk about incorporating multimodal feedback for second language writing. And look at give one example of how we might do that. So it's kind of a simple, we might say simple, but something to remember when we are giving feedback in writing and what tech tools allow us to do with using different modalities. And so when we think about modes of feedback, we're typically thinking about written. We typically, or at least in my experience as a teacher, this is sort of our default, is written feedback. But we can also include audio feedback, either standing alone for different purposes or to complement written feedback. And we can also include video elements through using tools like screencasting. That, like, one popular tool is Screencast-O-Matic. And so all of those different modes, it depends on what technology you use, what you have access to, and what works for your students. But I do think, and I've included some resources at the end of the presentation, if you want to look more into the research behind using different modalities for writing feedback. But there's a lot of benefits that can support different student preferences, reinforcing the different feedback and ideas that you're trying to convey, provide elements of tone or nuance to feedback, or to clarify other issues. And then it can also enhance the sort of conversation that comes into the feedback process if students can also join in with audio or multimodal responses to feedback. So it's also more participatory. So there's a few options for, I'm going to focus on one and do an example of using one Google extension for making an audio comment and adding that into a Google Doc. But I wanted to also provide some other options. Google's pretty popular, and Google Chrome is pretty popular. Google Docs is pretty popular. So I do want to make sure everybody is familiar with Google Docs add-ons that can be connected into Google Docs that provide multimodal feedback options. And there's some options here that you can find if you go into Google Docs. Click on add-ons and search for them and get add-ons. And you can see my little screenshot has several of those there. But we're going to look at a Google extension. So the Google extension is what's actually used not just in docs or slides, but in the web browser in Google Chrome, and can be used on different websites, can be accessed directly from the browser. And I want to show you how to use it and how you could incorporate that in to provide feedback in a different mode, in audio mode. Okay, so Google Extensions there is a link in the presentation. If the one we're going to look at is called Talk and Comment. And so if you clicked on that link, it would bring you up to this page where you could add that extension to your Google Chrome, which of course you could do right now if you wanted to play around with it on your own. Okay, I'm going to toggle back to my presentation. So give me just one sec. Okay, so this one, yeah, so you can either search for Talk and Comment and that'll come up, or click directly on that link and install that extension. So the way this works is it basically, it's accessible from your browser. So you don't have to open up any other program or anything like that in order to use it. And it creates a unique link to a saved short audio file that can be, if you have the extension, it can actually be embedded into a comment in Google Docs so that it's really accessible to whoever's reading it or accessing it. If you don't have the extension, it's also pretty accessible. It's just not embedded. You would click on a link and it will open into a separate link, but it's still pretty usable. So I'll show you kind of what that looks like and how it works. I'm going to go to this example document where you can see, you should be able to see where, if you noticed where it came up, the link was there. And you can see how now it's showing how it's embedded into the actual comment itself. So I should have shared my sound so you can hear the comment that I made.
Does this work?
Okay, so it does work. If you were able to hear it. And how did I create that? Well, on the right side of the page, because I have this extension installed, you should be able to see that little icon pop up there, which you can use to create any audio comment you want. And once you do that, you should be able, I'm not sure if you should be able to see where it has automatically copied that link, and then I can paste it. So if I want that on a particular section of the writing that I'm commenting on, I can insert a comment either by clicking here or going to insert, paste the link. And if they don't have the extension, that link would stay there and be accessible, or it's here, which you can use to create any audio comment you want. And that is a pretty simple, accessible, easy way to insert some audio comments when you think it's appropriate, purposeful, etc. So I know I've used up my time now, but write down any questions that you have and let me know what they are, either by emailing, putting in the chat, or save them for the end. Thanks, everybody, and looking forward to the next tips.
Thank you so much, Elise. John is our next presenter.
Yeah, hello, my name is John Turnbull. I'm also, like Elise, a student of culture, literacy, and language at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I'm going to be talking about some tech tips for teaching L2 writers vocabulary, or helping them improve their lexical awareness and the choices that they make. So I'm going to talk about two different techniques that I have used with students. One is a digital vocabulary journal, and the second is the research that students can do on certain academic phrases. These two involve language corpora, and in case anybody does not know, a language corpus can be defined as just a collection, a searchable digital collection of language. If you want to think about Google in that way, it's just a gigantic with billions and billions of words that we can search in different ways. So both of these teaching tips involve language corpora. And I'll also say that I've had the most success doing this in a computer lab. I have students, of course, most of us do, I think, who have their phones with them. It's hard to do these activities on a phone. I do like these lessons or mini lessons because I think it brings discovery into the classroom and lets students play. They can just play around in these resources. And when I think about why vocabulary is important in second language writing, I think about my own second language writing in Spanish. And one of the major things that hinders me is I just don't have the lexical range that a first language Spanish speaker does. And the vocabulary that I do have, I don't always understand the semantic range, or I don't have that flexibility of using words as a first language writer might. So I think that our second language writers can benefit from learning more about the semantics and the meaning dimensions of various words. So on this slide, this is an actual example on the right of a student that I had. This is one of her vocabulary entries. So she chose the word minion, and it's an odd example, I think, because I think probably everybody in the world knows what a minion is by now, based on the movies and the television programs. But on the left-hand side, I show you the various technical resources that were needed to make this journal. So there are 4 elements to it. The first is a quotation from the reading that we were doing at the time. The second is an example from one of these language corpora. So the student did a search and found an example of the use of the word minion. The third is a meme, and there's a link there to one of the meme generating sites. There are probably thousands of those. And then the last one that I'll talk a little bit more about is called a word spider, where students find the common prefixes and suffixes that go onto the front and back of a word. So this was the word spider creation that the student came up with based on her corpus search. And obviously, the most common one is the plural form, which is added at the end, the minions. But these are other examples that she found. And how did she do this? How did she come up with these variations? So she navigated to this link, which is on this slide. This is a database that I think Rana is going to talk more about in her presentation later. But in this database, if you enter the word and you put an asterisk at the beginning and the end, this will return a list of prefixes and suffixes. So we're going to see on the next slides what things go at the beginning and what things go at the end. So this is the actual output. And this is where a teacher and instructor is going to have to work with students on interpreting the output that they get. For example, we see the number 5 phrase for prefixes and suffixes on minion is Toronto Dominion. I have no idea what that is. Maybe that's something in the province of Ontario, Canada. I don't know, but it is not something that students are going to be able to do without some scaffolding, going through this raw corpus data. So the second teaching tip is about doing research on academic phrases. And the first tool is to use Google Scholar for this. So we're going to do a search on 3 phrases, a bunch of, a lot of, and a number of. And I think those of us as first language English users are going to know that in academic contexts, the phrase a number of is more appropriate. But a second language writer is not necessarily going to know that. So they can do a search in Google Scholar to show, as you see at the results at the bottom, that a bunch of is much less frequent than the other 2, and a number of is the most prominent. You can do this with other phrases, of course. The possibilities are endless. The students can come up with their own searches to do. This is just one example. Another resource online to use is the Ngram Viewer, which is a Google database of books dating back to the early 19th century. And if we do the same search in this resource, we see a similar outcome where a bunch of is less prominent than the other two. And then the last resource that I'm going to share is the Michigan Corpus of Upper Level Student Papers, which is from the English Language Institute at the University of Michigan. And I really love this resource because you can search on papers by second language writers, or you can search on papers by first language English users. And if we do the same phrase search in this corpus, the results are even more stark, I think, where a bunch of only appears 3 times in this collection of student work, and a number of is the most common. I'll show you an output screen for this resource. Here I've typed a number of into the search box at the top. And I love the layout of this particular tool because you can see how many times it occurs and how many papers it occurs. You can see in which disciplines the word is used or the phrase is used. You can see what paper types the phrase is used. And then at the bottom of this slide, you see the actual phrases in context and the actual occurrence in this corpus. So I am going to put in the chats the link to this presentation. So if you want to download it and use those links, you are perfectly welcome to do that. And I thank you, and let's move on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, John. Next up is Andrew.
Hola. Let me share my screen here. Guys, my name is Andrew Walton, and you guys can see my screen, right? Not of heads. Thank you. I am a graduate research assistant. I was a TA for the TESOL program. I was able to teach technology for language learning. I'm currently my 4th year and about to conduct my dissertation. I have been a teacher, a world language teacher for the last 11 years. And so I really love using technology in the classroom. And then down below, you can see the bit.ly that you guys can get to be able to access a folder with a lot of this information on it. And you can also follow me on Twitter at WaltonsWorld15. With that said, I love using this app. It's on the iPad. It's called Texting Story. And I like to have what we call crucial conversations through Texting Story. Kids these days, students these days, we all text. That's our natural way of communicating with one another. And I like to trick my kids into learning. And so what better way to trick kids into learning and researching than texting each other? And so what I do in this particular lesson, I will have them, we went over some grammar rules, and I'll show an example of what that would look like. And so you'll have student 1 and student 2, and they will ask a question, answer the question, ask another question, or they just have a conversation between each other, utilizing whatever vocabulary or grammar that I have recently taught. So I have here an example of what this may look like. This is an example of we had to take 2 history figures. And so the 2 students chose 2 different queens, Nefertiti and Cleopatra. And this is what it looks like. So they had to actually do research to actually get all this stuff and then write out their scripts and practice their scripts. And this is a final result. And through this app, when students are working together, they just click on Cleopatra, type in what they want to type, hit send, type Nefertiti, type in what they want to type, hit send, and thus you get a texting story. So this was an example that two participants of mine did, and they actually had time to research other about Nefertiti and Cleopatra. Now I want to I don't want to play this again. If I can show you really quickly. So when I did provide this for my students, I provided a writing a script to start this off, and I did this in Spanish, but I've also done this in an ESL class. And then, as one should, so this was what I had shown them. You must use the preterite tense, must include 20 different preterite tense verbs, and I provided a standards-based grading rubric for them to meet or exceed the expectation. In this link that I provided you all this information, as well as I'm going to add in some examples more examples from students for you guys to look at and get ideas from. But that is how I like to encourage writing in a second language classroom through texting story. That's it.
Thanks, Andrew. I think next is Rana.
I'll share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Rana Al-Nafay, and I'm a PhD student, a third year PhD student at the University of Texas San Antonio in the Cultural Literacy and Language Department. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about how we can use COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary English, as a corpus tool to enhance collocational knowledge and also to search for synonyms. So before I wanted to start, I wanted to to define what we mean by collocations first. So collocations are conventionalized expressions like heavy rain, take care, cost of fortune. And also there are different types of collocations like verb and noun, pay attention, take care, adjective and noun like heavy rain, long time, noun and noun as salt and pepper. Okay, so why did I want to talk about collocations? Because so many researchers have said that the use of collocations in L2 writing usually correlates with good writing scores, especially in standardized testing. So the more students use collocation, the better their scores will be. And why did I choose synonyms for this presentation? Because synonyms are essential component for good writing skills. And also most of the textbook in L2 writing usually includes some parts of synonyms. And also why did I want to focus on COCA? Because COCA is easily accessible and also it's free. And it contains more than 1 billion words from different registers and genres. For the levels that can be applicable to this presentation, you can apply those techniques or tips for various levels depending on the target items, the language items that you choose. And here's a picture of the COCA corpus, but I'll show you like more pictures in the upcoming slides. So I'll start with collocations. The first thing that we need to do is we should access this link. I'll share my slides after I finish. And also we will talk about how we can search for collocations that start with an adjective, then noun, like heavy rain. So after you access the COCA, you should click on this plus sign. And then after you click on the plus sign, you will see the word Collocates. Click on that and make sure that you're logged in. Just register, and registering to this COCA is very easy. Like you only need your email, and also it's free. After you've done that, click on the POS, the part of speech, and notice that we have here some numbers. So those numbers usually those numbers mean like how many words you want before the main noun that you chose. For example, for the word rain, I wanted to see only one word before the word rain and one word after the same word. And then I clicked on adjective because I wanted, for example, my students to see all adjectives that come before the word rain. And here is the list of the results that you can obtain after following those steps. So you can see that the word heavy usually collocates more with the noun that we chose: pouring, next, light, and freezing. So maybe you can use like the same example if your students wrote something like strong rain, for example. And after you click on the word, the same word, for example, heavy here, you will get this result or this screen. And this screen has what is called concordance lines. And those lines show like an actual authentic text about how this collocation appear in like authentic real text. So you can ask your students maybe to read, to test, and the goal mostly is to help our students become more autonomous learners. We don't want to do this, or we don't want to use this only one time in class, but we want them to use this tool whenever they have a writing task. And also back to the line of numbers here, if you remember, the 1, 2, 3, 4, I chose number 4 because I wanted to show that sometimes the adjective can come like 3 words before the main noun that we chose. So I clicked on number 4, before and after. And then here is the result that I get: heavy miles of rain, heavy band of rain. So our students can know that like we should not, or it doesn't have to be only one word before the noun that we wanted to choose. So this is it about the first step, which is the collocation. The second step is also how to search through COCA to find synonyms. This is a very easy and direct step, but it has a very cool feature which can show our students the different genre and register. So what we need to do first is we click on the word list here, and then we add an equal mark or sign before the word, and then I chose the word suggest here. So after you do this, you go to the word section, you see it here. And then after you click on the word section, choose different genres, because we want, for example, our students to see like the different synonyms for each different genre. So I chose academic, and for the second corpus, I chose spoken English. And then click on find matching strings. And after that, you will see the different synonyms for the same word that are used in the academic corpus versus the spoken corpus. So you can see here the word suggest, indicate, advocate, imply, propose. Yes, they are similar to the spoken English, but for example, you can see here the word recommend came on the 5th place, but 7th on the academic. And usually the academic corpus, a synonym, like a better synonym could be the word indicate, while in the spoken could be remind. So this is it for the tip that I have. Thank you so much for listening, and this is my email. I'll share my presentation now in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rana. And our 5th and final tech tip to be shared, we'll turn it over to Leticia.
Okay, let me just get there. All right, here we are. Hello, my name is Leticia Medina. I am a PhD candidate in the Cultural Literacy and Language program at UTSA. I've taught academic writing in EFL and ESL contexts, but what I'm going to share with you today is about teaching academic writing in Russia. I was the English language fellow for Moscow, Russia in 2019, 2020. So I was there right when the pandemic hit. And going into the teaching environment there, it became clear very, very early on that the focus, the students' focus was on, hold on, let me change my view. How do I change my view? Oh, let me just minimize this. The focus became, it became very clear that the focus was on preparing academic articles for publication in academic journals. Also, overwhelmingly, my students were graduate students in the material sciences and some computer, but definitely we're talking about quantitative experimental research and not too much qualitative, which is really interesting because I'm a qualitative researcher. So this was a little new to me. The environment, I should say. So we focused very early on taking a genre-based approach, and then more specifically on the IMRAD structure, the structure that allows us to identify these 4 major sections of academic papers. So I won't spend too much time going through each section. Rather, what I wanted to show you was how I broke it down for my students, and how I broke it down for my students in their anatomy of a paper assignment, which is a dissection of an academic article that they had to present. So I show them this, we go through this very basic representation of the IMRAD, and then flesh it out a little so that they can see that there are subsections and then subsections to those sections. And then they can start attaching questions to each section so that as they build their presentation, they have these markers that they can stick to, so that their presentation is well organized, and their presentation is about these 4 sections, these 4 major sections of the IMRAD structure. Okay, and then further in the assignment that I give them, I do give them guiding questions, or at least guiding bullet points, so that they know, okay, in this section, I'm supposed to identify these elements in this academic article that I've chosen to present. And then in this, so the introduction section, right, is supposed to cover this stuff. It's supposed to cover that information, and then, or include that information. And then in the method section, that's about the design of the study. So the introduction is about the what or the why. The methods section is about the how. How are you going to answer that research question? And this one is a little more, it's meatier, right? It has more information, or it covers more information. And then the results section are your findings. So after you ask the question and after you went about answering the question, then what did you find, right? So this is oftentimes the more visual part of an academic paper. At least it was for my material scientists, because their academic papers were very visual heavy. Again, they had a lot of charts and graphs and images that they included, or that are included in their academic articles. And then the discussion or conclusion section of the paper, this is where you discuss your findings. And then this section also includes recommendations or a call for further research. So once my students had a good grasp of the elements included in these sections, introduction, methods, results, and discussion / conclusion, then they would dissect a paper. So the anatomy of a paper assignment, and I'll just say that I always like the analogy of dissecting. Oh, is there a question? Because I think, okay. I always like the analogy of dissecting because, you know, it's kind of gory, but it's also about precision, right? You want to make sure that you identify, or that you clearly identify these sections in an academic article. So their task was to find a peer-reviewed article in a Q1 journal in their field of research. And this link is to Science Direct, which is the database that they would do their searches in. So one benefit, well, there are many benefits to this assignment, but one was that they got to practice the research skills. I was struck by the fact that the Russian students that were in my courses did not really go to academic databases for their articles. So in my classes, they got to practice those skills, like the using keywords, refining research by other means, sticking to peer-reviewed articles only. So they got to practice those research skills. And then in their chosen article to be dissected, they would identify the main research question or propose one if the author didn't explicitly state the research question. And then they dissected the article. They identified the 4 major sections in one article. And yeah, so many benefits. They got to practice research skills. They also became very familiar with the language around this specific genre of academic or scientific articles. And then I incorporated TikTok towards the end of the course. So we looked at TikTok videos, which are already very short, and then they would have to decide, thinking about the properties of the IMRAD structure, the students would have to decide this video represents the method section, or this video represents the discussion conclusion section, or the introduction, if it was like a little bit of background information. And I linked 2 videos here. I don't think we have time to look at either one, but I do highly recommend that you look at them. And then maybe at some point you can let me know which section you think the COVID-19 red flags would represent in the IMRAD structure, and which section you think this video would represent in the IMRAD structure. Yeah, and I wanted to incorporate TikTok because it's not just about knowing word usage and proper sentence structure or accurate sentence structure, but lots of times students want to learn another language because it's a way to learn about another culture, and incorporating this social media phenomenon that TikTok is a good way to touch on those, to make it cross-cultural as well as maybe even interdisciplinary. And that's all I have for you. Let me go back to my regular view. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. These were also great tech tools. I want to open it up for questions since we have a little bit of time, and they can be questions to an individual presenter or for the whole group. I'm happy to get us started. Oh, Megan, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, I had a quick question first of all, thank you so much. If these are PhD students coming out of programs now, I'm so hopeful about our future because I'm really impressed with what you all are doing. I had a question for those of you working with corpora. You know, we work a lot with corpora, and there is a lot of scaffolding involved for sometimes what seems like a kind of small payoff if you're spending a lot of time searching for something very precise, and teaching students how to use the resource. So how do you counterbalance that? I mean, John, you talked about mini lessons, right? Like, how do you make sure that if they're looking at something so small and narrow, the larger learning benefit is clear? Is it just that they can reproduce or replicate what they've done, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I don't know, I guess I can share how it worked. I use this, I'll just speak about the vocabulary journal. I used it in both reading and writing classes. And the students, we did several mini lessons so they got familiar with the language corpus and how it worked. And Rana spoke also about, spoke well about all the things that you can do with it. I started off with a heavily scaffolded scavenger hunt. So I sort of knew what they were going to find. I gave them some specific questions. So they were going to be rewarded in what they found. And only then did I open it up to them using it for their own digital vocabulary journal projects. And, you know, it was sometimes hit or miss. To be honest, you know, the vocabulary journals, specifically where they were looking for prefixes and suffixes of words, what it did is it opened up a conversation where I could point to certain examples that they had found and said, well, this isn't really, you know, this isn't really something that we would use in academic writing, or this is a case where the language corpus returns some data that we should really throw out, you know. What the counterbalance for me is that we're looking at real authentic language. And when they're out of the classroom, there's not going to be a neat answer or a neat return on what they find. So I like to throw in the authenticity elements and let them sort of battle a bit, you know, with the messiness of the English language and how messy it can be. But that whatever they're producing is looked at by me, and then we could start talking about the data, how it's good, how it's not good, that sort of thing. It's not, you know, your point is extremely well taken, because it's not a clean, tidy, one size fits all solution for using these language corpora in the classroom. The output is quite messy at times.
Yes, thank you. And it takes a lot of time, you know, for them to work with one word and produce all of this stuff. It's such a generative activity, but it's still just one word at, you know, at the end of it. So I get it. But the use of the technology and the criticality they need to apply to the use, I think, is the message. And
like Rana said, the hope is that they could see this as a resource for writing in the future. Like I do this for Spanish, you know, I don't rely on the Google translator, it just doesn't do the job. But I can do my own searches if I'm writing something and I find a phrase and try and decide, well, is this really authentic or not? Is this something that I can do the Google search or use another corpora research to find out if I'm using the phrase properly or not?
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks, John. We do have a question that came in on the chat thread from Ahmed, who asks, do you think using one, some, or all of those technologies in L2 writing classes will positively or negatively affect students' writing as a creative art? It was a general question for any.
Yeah, I might start, and then probably others have ideas too. But the first thing that comes to mind is that, Every tool, it's just a tool, and it depends on how you use it. So when we're looking at, if we're thinking about positive or negative effects on students writing as a creative art, I think that's more about how the tool is presented to the student. So if creativity is a value in that classroom where that tool is being used, then the tool can be useful. But if it's used as more of a sort of black and white, right or wrong, just like John, you were talking about the messiness of the language, but we can also use those corpora in sort of a, well, you see, this is how it's done and this is how it's not. And so I think they're tools that could positively impact or negatively impact depending on how they are applied in the classroom and the values of those applying them.
I wonder too how Ahmed is defining creativity, as in creative fiction, or because I think of creativity in the writing classroom also having to do with generating, producing, writing. So that's interesting it would be interesting for me to know if Ahmed, right? Is that I thought that was the questioner's name, is thinking about, creative fiction versus, scientific writing, which, I argue that scientists and poets have so much more in common than anyone thinks.
Yeah, Ahmed, you're welcome to add to the chat thread if you want to tease that out for us or unmute yourself. I think so many of these tools, when I think of the connection to creativity, I automatically go to the doors that they open for creativeness within academic spaces. I think historically academic writing as a genre has been pretty limited, and some of these tools are giving our students chances to explore academic writing, perhaps in more creative and fun ways.
And I would just add that the students that I've had, and I find this in my Spanish writing, is that I'm often limited. Speaking about vocabulary, is I'll come back to the same word or the same phrase over and over and over again, not realizing that there's a myriad of other possibilities. So just an example that I gave, for students, a bunch of, a lot of, there are some students who might not have even known that a bunch of was a possibility. So it gives them a larger quiver, a larger toolbox of words or phrases that they might be able to use. And the aim is, for me, is creativity. It is self-expression. It is generativity. So I think that those things can be realized.
And Ahmed did add to the thread that generation or generating something new or original was what was meant by creativity.
I should say also that a couple of the presenters had such creativity in their approach to the technology, like Andrew and Leticia, I think, had some core like learning goals of a verb tense or something, but had such a creative way of implementing it with text-based stories where the language use was much less formal, or taking the TikTok videos and applying it to an IMRD paper. Like that's a really generative and creative way of approaching the learning, right?
Also, I did also want to say that this presentation to me is very meta, because we're using Zoom and PowerPoint or slides or some other presentation platform already to talk about incorporating technology. So I'm a fan of PowerPoint. I know lots of people think it might be stodgy, but to me it can be really fresh. But anyway, just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off Megan. I think that is where I have to agree with Elise first. Like, technology is just a tool, and is how you as a teacher utilize that tech tool to be able to, let's say, generate that learning. you have that goal, your learning goal, your language goal, your objective for your class. And so I know students, and I know, like, you know, adolescent students, and they, I mean, even my brain won't function in a way that used to function when I was growing up in the classroom. So I try to be, you know, a creative teacher and using different avenues. Like, I've used TikTok in the classroom to make videos and to make students speak and listen. And just this writing assessment using like texting story. I think it is how you are able to frame your objective for the class with that, with what you're doing, with what the tech tool is. Now, I would say in that story, the texting story that I provided as an example during the presentation, it was very lax in language. And it was just because it was actually two adults who were testing this texting story out for the first time. And I just love that funny Nefertiti Cleopatra story. But I've also clearly outlaid in my own classroom, and I provided in that link, you know, what the expectation is to meet or exceed the expectation for language learning purposes. And so that is when then I was able to get the grammar and the vocabulary that I was expecting my students to, you know, learn from there.
Andrew, related to text story, is that a tool that can be used by an individual student writer where they could create the dialogue between the two?
Yes. So I've had classes where I had them do it in partners, and then I've had other classes where I just had, because, you know, I want them to work. So I had other classes where I just had them do it as one person, and literally, and you can have even more people in your group text that will pop up using that app.
Yeah, I immediately was imagining some of my TESOL graduate students creating a dialogue between two scholars. Any other questions?
I have a comment for Ahmed's question. So I think a good way for using a corpus and like to reach that goal that you're discussing, Ahmed, is maybe ask the students to create their own corpus. Like they collect, for example, if they're low students or students who are studying English literature, for example, they can collect some papers from English literature or the low, low papers, and then they will just upload those papers into a corpus their own corpus, and then they can analyze the language used there. So maybe it won't happen, like the creative writing and like the improving of the writing won't happen in one set, but the teacher's role is to guide them through this process at the beginning until they become like autonomous learners, and they will know the jargons used there. They might, like the good ones, they might create their own jargons, as you said. So this is what I was thinking about, like creating your own corpus.
When you think about your most recent use of these tools with your students, were there any challenges in getting them on board, and how did you navigate those challenges in introducing the tool and getting them to use it effectively?
Okay, so I like to use many different tech tools, and I think it's just how excited I am about using the tool, and then relating it to their real lives. So I tend to have a lot less challenges getting students to copy a tool, but I will also add that in anything I do, it is just not I say you do. I provide many different ways, avenues to basically have a choice board almost for every single assignment. So one of the choices is to do a texting story, right? One of the choices is to traditionally do a writing, whatever. I have many different, like I said, I just provide choice and options for students to choose which format they want to do it, all with the same writing or language objective, I should say.
Yeah, I think just basically to reiterate that, I think it's always just important to be ready for something to not work the way you planned for it to work, and just be flexible in adjusting how you need to, or responding to students' needs, because then even if I'm really excited about it and it's working really well for me, that doesn't necessarily translate on the other end. And so if it's not working, we just need to recognize it's not working and try something else or give options. So that sort of flexibility and ease, and not getting, we always talk about, I think, getting frustrated with technology, but if we can put that aside and just brainstorm what's the next best thing, or and focus on the objective, then it's fine. But always being ready to change course, which we all know since we're teachers.
But still, a great reminder for all of us as we gear up for another semester in interesting times. I want to be respectful of your time. We've used an hour. I've learned a lot. I appreciate the 5 of you so much, and wish you all the best in your studies and teachings this fall. And thanks to those who joined us as participants.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.